Hi everyone, welcome to episode 45 of the Startup Playbook podcast. My name is Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. In this episode, my guest is Andrew Walton. Andrew is the founder and CEO of InteractSport, which provides software for sports at the national, state, association and club levels. They work with organisations such as Cricket Australia, Netball Australia, Australian Rugby Union, and the ECB in the UK. Their software collects information and records from 4 million participants who come from more than 20,000 organisations, and there have been more than 5 million matches recorded on their platforms. Aside from InteractSport, Andrew is also a director at the Australian Sports Technology Network, director at Vicsport, and director of Bowls Australia. In this episode, we talk about the importance of relationships, selling into traditional industries, the importance of listening to your customers, and scaling through culture. Without further ado, here is my interview with Andrew Walton. Hi Andrew, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Rohit, fabulous to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Not a problem. So I've known you for quite a while now, but for those people that are listening at home that may not be as aware of you or your background, can you share a little bit of your story and what got you here today?
Yeah, so InteractSport started with 3 friends on the balcony of their cricket club 17 years ago on March 19th. And we were wanting to develop a better way of managing information for our club. At the time, between the 3 of us, I was the coach, so I had the appetite for knowledge and data around the game. My partner Peter was at Melbourne University and had developed a product called StatMan, which was where we used to key scorecard information into StatMan, and it would give us a series of tables and charts that we would then use for being aware of our performances. And David, my third partner and brother of Peter, was at the time heavily involved in starting to build sort of early website sort of technology back in the sort of late 90s. And that initial need to do something better for our club that we all came together on. 3 country blokes. I'm from Mooroopna, Pete and Dave from Numurkah and Ballarat, and we just happened to be together at a club that had a very sort of loose affiliation through Uni Blues Footy Club, and it was a nice place, Como Park, to play cricket back then, and it was a good environment that we found that helped not only us meet a need for the people that we were directly involved with in community sport, yet it expanded over time into the association and clubs and the sport around us. And if anything, it was our passion. We were all, cricket is a game that sort of brought us all together in various ways, and I've continued on, stopped playing many years ago now, but coach in the Premier Grade level here. Yet as we've sort of got a bit older, we've all got children now of various ages, and they play community sport, and in some cases those sports use the services that we provide. And so it's been in a way, we just do what we enjoy. Happens to be in sport, so we get paid to deliver a service into something we like doing, which is part of our life. And now that we have grown over a period of time, now with 18 staff collectively, many who have come to us through the connections that we have made through our sporting clubs and the various relationships that exist there, it gives you a great deal of satisfaction, Rohit.
Absolutely. I can only imagine. So, I guess going back to, you mentioned the concept sort of came to you, Peter and Dave, when you were sort of sitting around on the balcony of the cricket game. So, I'm sure that there are some listeners at home who are obviously with cricket, you have a lot of time to kind of sit around and talk, or are kind of in the corporate space and have sort of identified something that they want to start. Yeah. What did that sort of initial phase look like for you of, we've got this idea that we want to sort of better manage the data that's coming out of our club, into actually turning that into a business?
Yes, at the time, I'd just come back also from being in the UK for the 99 World Cup, and it was my first time in the UK, and I realised there was this enormous interest in a publication called Time Out magazine in the UK, where each week people would gather around the various walkabout bars and stuff that exist in the UK and get their footy results and knowledge from back home, and then sort of realising, well, because now we've got the internet and the ability to transfer information no matter where we are in the world, it's nice to see that the score between Richmond and Geelong or the Swans and Hawthorn, yet why can't we find the score between Frankston and Narre Warren, for example? And when we sort of started this, we sort of took that need into our club, because typically back then, a game of cricket in the community space, you'd play the game of cricket, the match would be scored. At the end of the day's play, somebody would have to transpose that information from a scorecard onto a piece of paper. That piece of paper would then be faxed to an association or league secretary, who would then take that content, either type it into a database or transpose it to a different piece of paper that would then go into his management system, and then also off to AAP for the media, so that maybe by Monday the Herald Sun might have two sort of lines of text as to what happened in the game. Yet sport creates a lot of data, a lot of stats that we want to know about. So we felt that would give great content for our website that would create a point of interest. But we also found, Rohit, that we wanted it to be as easy as possible, because back in 2000, 2001, the internet was only really just starting to a degree in Australia, and not everybody was connected, and not everybody had the skills to even be interested or using it. So we did a old-fashioned postal survey. We actually sent out questionnaires to I think it was about 600 sort of recipients, got 130 replies, and that sort of formed our thinking for what was going to be needed going forward. And we realised we had to make it as simple as possible, that if data was entered into a system, it had to be foolproof, had to be immediately available, so it couldn't sit in a database, it had to be transferred and uploaded and something later on. And it had to follow the principle that data entered once flows where it needs to go. So for example, if a club selects their team, then once that team's selected, that team list is a team list, or it becomes part of a scorecard or part of a match report or part of an umpire's report, without those extra steps of duplication as described before. Cricket was to a degree quite sort of fortuitous for us to get a starting point, because when we looked at the time in Victoria, trying to convert a match result into a ladder automatically without having to go through an extensive process. So we found that in Victoria, of the 100, I think it was 102 associations back then, there were nearly 40 different ways that a match result could be interpreted into a ladder. Now, just as a comparison, in the world of football, soccer, round ball game, whether we're playing the game in Bacchus Marsh, or we're playing in Brazil, or we're playing in Norway, it's a pretty standard format. It's 3 points for a win, one for a draw, and you're divided on goal difference, no matter where you play in the world. Cricket, not quite that simple. So what it presented to us was a series of mathematical complications that we recognised we had to solve. And in our own club was quite unique, because we had 4 teams, 2 that played on Saturday, 2 that played on Sunday, different competitions. The Sunday competition was primarily one-day matches, so you'd get a result at the end of each day. The Saturday competition also had things like bonus points and net run rate and percentages. So all these different requirements made sure that our thinking early on was very broad, to understand that you can't just build a piece of code and think it'll work for everybody. So it taught us the need to adapt and be flexible from an early start. The other thing we took from that was that in a club, that a player could play in different teams on different days in different competitions. Yet you didn't want the player having different records. You wanted that source of truth to be accurate and to be a single source of identity. So it made us understand, I suppose at a reasonably high level, the importance of that data flow process and how it needed to work, without having different people perform different tasks, and therefore creating what we've seen over the time, very complicated databases that are riddled with error because things are being duplicated. And that logic of data into once goes where it needs to go, no matter the type of competition, held pretty true as our experience went on, and we were brought into delivering services for other sports. So fundamentally, we provide any sport with a ball and a score, we have a customised solution for it. Some at a high end and some at a fairly basic end. Yet we found that by cracking that sort of requirement for cricket, it held us true in good space later on. And probably one other little sort of side stories early on is in cricket, a bowler can bowl 7 overs and 5 balls, 7.5. Yet if you're having that conversation with a code or a programmer, try and explain to them that 7.5 is not 7.5,
yeah.
and how that then needs to relate to the statistic tables down the line. So it was sort of like almost accidental that the needs within cricket presented a whole range of equational complications that needed to be solved, and we were passionate about the sport, and it helped us the basis where we are today.
Sure. I really want to come back to the passion and kind of clearly your sort of deep understanding of the market that you were sort of coming in. But one of the things that you mentioned was that you sort of sent out the mail surveys.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the things that I see with a lot of early stage startups is they'll do surveys, but they'll do them in a way that doesn't add them a lot of value. So for example, they'll say, if we showed you how you can save money on your app, will you download this product? And obviously 95% of people will say yes. That doesn't actually, prove the value proper for your business. So I was wondering, when you sort of sent out those surveys, what was it that you were looking to, so what questions did you have in there, and what were you sort of looking to have answered?
Yeah, what we were trying to establish was a real need for the information, because before the survey situation had occurred, myself and Peter, we went to Cricket Australia in the old office in Jolimont, and we sat down with some senior people there, and we explained this sort of concept idea that we had with a few rudimentary sort of screenshots. Now, bear in mind, this is 2001, this is a long, long time ago. And the response was really positive, was, oh, look, good idea, we think that it would probably work. Okay, and then the next question, well, how can we make it work? What is your level of interest? How do we do it? And they said, we actually don't know. So Cricket Australia going, we don't know. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, you actually have to have the states sort of involved, because they're the ones who control all the competitions and those relationships. Okay. Well, so then are you okay, Cricket Australia, if we make contact with the states? I said, yeah, sure, go for your life. So I then got on the phone and email and just started finding the right person within the states to talk to, and that was an interesting challenge, because by contacting and wanting to talk about technology from their side, it created a problem, because we're like, is that the IT manager? Is that marketing? Is that community sport? Who's actually responsible for this sort of area? Is that a website? No, it's not a website, it's more of a system. So as we sort of gradually found our way to the right people in the state areas, we then recognised that one of the first things we wanted to establish was, is there a database of clubs? Like, do we know how many clubs there are and who's playing with those clubs? The answer was generally no. Well, Cricket Australia didn't know, because they thought it was the state's responsibility. And then as we were communicating with the states, in some cases, yeah, they did know, or you could tell by the conversation they thought they know, but they weren't really sure. And others took the view that, that's confidential information, you can't have access to that. Or if you'd like access to it, we can sell it to you. So that sort of made us understand that, all right, if we're going to make this work, we're going to have a direct relationship with those who play the game. And so essentially build our own database to a degree. Hence the survey came out, 3 pages, 14 questions, posted in the mail to 600 or so people across a whole range of Australia. And it was doing some simple stuff initially, like asking, did they have an online presence? What was it? What size was their club? How many players? How many officials? Who had responsibility for administration tasks? How much time per week? Because we felt from an early stage, if we got that principle of data entered once, flows where it needs to go, it would remove duplication in the process, and therefore we always wanted to attach a fee to what we did. And if we're going to charge a fee of some sort, we had to prove to the end user that they were going to get a return back in time and efficiency gained. But overwhelmingly, we sort of found that the appetite to, whether it be North Sydney or the beaches of Western Australia or country Victoria, that there was a genuine appetite to do things better, and a curiosity amongst people to understand more about what a website can do. Because I suppose when we were dealing with those at governing body level at the time, the initial response was, we've got a website. And we go, yeah, okay, but what does it do what's it doing for you? It tells us where we are, and we can put up some news, and it's got contact details. Well, that's not much different to an old printed handbook. But the other thing too, we also sort of found that the average cost to a club and or an association in printing handbooks and printing information, and quite often, Rohit, even printing the fixtures at the start of the season, a lot of effort would go into, here's our fixture book for the start of the year. And invariably, a lot of competitions, by round 1, round 2, the fixture book was irrelevant because teams had either fallen out, collapsed, had to be changed, regraded. So that sunken cost of, in some cases, it ranged between $2,000 to $3,000 to $10,000 a year. And that was just to print paper. On top of that, in a lot of cases, the postage also. So there was already costs involved in community sport, allegedly by volunteers, just to actually make the thing run, that we felt we could do better by making it more streamlined. And a lot of that's held through today. So I think the fact that we actually got we got the benefit of creating that physical connection early on, and apart from the survey, then in the background we were reaching out to people. We were collecting yearbooks or annual reports, or we could see some people more active in, well, back then, forums of some sort that were happy to sort of converse online, and we built our own sort of network, and gradually we started to create the framework of what became a cricket sort of database. And that was then, and also understanding the relationships of where clubs fitted in, who they belonged to, the differences between junior and senior cricket, and it was just really immersing ourselves in that space, created all the learning that formed the elements of the business, and it remained that way for about 6 years, because it wasn't until 2007 that Cricket Australia sort of understood the size and the scale and where they wanted to go from an online perspective. And up until that, we'd operated independently, directly with associations, clubs. West Australian Cricket Association was our first state organisation to be involved as a client. It's an interesting, I don't know what, it sort of still holds true today, that people in WA, maybe because of the tyranny of distance, actually get the importance of being online and being able to communicate. Maybe the distance and the time zone thing. We had really good support there early on through a personal connection. I was playing cricket at a very low level. I was a very ordinary player back then for Prahran Cricket Club, and my journey there happened to coincide with David Hussey when David first came to Victoria. Not to be a contracted player, he was playing club cricket. He was working at the National Bank, and both being newcomers to a club, we sort of hit off a bit of a friendship, and through that, David introduced me to his father, Ted, who's now no longer with us. And Ted, in his role back in WA with Wanneroo Cricket Club, he was the club secretary. And he had an innate sort of interest and passion for doing things better and differently. And even though he was senior in age compared to us, he thought this was a wonderful idea to do things online. And thankfully, in the early days, Ted gave us some really good introductions to people of influence. And that probably taught us even further, Rohit, that we can be the smartest guys if we think we are. We can have the smartest, the best possible product available. Yet the importance of having credible, solid, and respected personal relationships, where you've got to be face to face with people or on the phone. You just can't purely rely on messaging and that sort of stuff. And that I suppose is not unusual to the behaviours that emerge within a sporting club, and that sort of helped us enormously back then.
Sure. I mean, obviously you just sort of touched on that, but once you had sort of that information or those sort of introductions in place, what did that sort of process look like to get your first few paying clients on board? Yeah,
a lot of face-to-face demonstrations, a lot of sneaking off from my paid full-time job early and catching a plane to Newcastle or to Bunbury and basically having public meetings and with groups of clubs and associations, and showing them, this is what we do, this is why we do it, this is why it's good for you. Sometimes your judgment, and typically because we were dealing with cricket being a summer sport, and if you were trying to introduce change, the actual window of opportunity was fairly narrow, because most cricket in the community space, most cricket comps don't turn their attention to it until the end of footy season. So your actual ability to get things done sort of falls somewhere between the end of July and the start of September. That's a very narrow window to make things happen. So generally it was a frantic time of year about being in front of people, hoping that your laptop and projector worked properly and you could put images up on a screen. Hopefully you had a good room to work within. I did have a wonderful experience in the hills of South Australia once in Adelaide, where I got to a pub to do this presentation, and there was no wall space at all because the wall was covered with artefacts from the war and or hunting trips, and there was not a blank space on the wall to project anything upon. I didn't have a screen with me, and I was told there was one available. It didn't emerge. So we ended up actually projecting on the ceiling and having people watch what was above as the flat surface. So you learn to adapt pretty quickly. Generally, though, we sort of found that there was always a couple of people that were interested in change and wanting to progress. So you could generally find a catalyst for wanting to make things better. Despite that, though, there also was Dave and I went on a trip to Adelaide, and we met with an association to present the what was going to come in for the new season, and at a very modest fee. We're talking a very low. It was not a pain point at all. It had all been approved by the upper body. Yet what had to unfold was that the clubs all had a vote, and there were 14 clubs to vote, and we were told, okay, come to the AGM. You'll be on first. You've got half an hour to speak and present, and then we'll vote and we'll move on. Thinking beauty. So we felt we'd done all the preparation in the background. Got me presented, seemed to go really well. We then got a phone call next day and they said, look, happy what you've done, except we're not going to proceed. And I was like, oh. So we've flown from Melbourne to Adelaide at our own expense. Why not? Oh, well, the Constitution, as it was pointed out, has to be a unanimous vote of acceptance, so it had to be 14-0. What was the vote? It was 13-1. And the one person was a proxy who didn't attend.
Jesus.
So that's just a little example of the sort of like when you're left to be assessed by volunteers or committee, it's not always a smooth sort of opportunity. And also that a number of people early on sort of took the view that they felt that technology was replacing their job or their position of responsibility or control or power within a club. So that was a bit of a barrier to encounter. Yet we gradually sort of found that, you know, our starting price point, just as we felt that if we charged a price we said junior teams was $25 per team per year, and senior teams was $50 per team per year. And that was for the complete service that we offered overall for everything involved in the club management, from competition, registration, participation, communications. So we try to sort of keep it around that somewhere, you know, it's $1 to sort of $3 per player per year. And which doesn't sound much, particularly like back then when people were prepared to pay $300 for a bat, yet to have, you know, $3 a year was a bit of a stretch. Yet thankfully we got enough of an audience early on, and that allowed us the first 4 years. We didn't make enough to pay ourselves. I think 1 year we were very happy. We had a dividend of $5,000 each at the end of the year, so that was a joyous occasion. Yet it covered our costs. We were hosting the servers in our bedroom. We covered the cost of all licenses and all the hardware attached to it, and by being able to sort of keep picking up sort of part-time and other work elsewhere, we sort of kept things ticking over. And then eventually we got the cricket side of things. We were directly servicing about 40% of the country. We had some very high level of support from associations in Manly and Newcastle, Williamstown, Penrith, great coverage in Western Australia, throughout country Victoria, Shepparton, Gippsland area, and in the end, I suppose it got to the point where it was too sizable that and Cricket Australia recognised that, well, if the states can't work it out, we need to sort of take a position here, and we were able to, you know, really work well with them initially. Despite them also, I mean, Damien Bowen, or Damien DeBowen as he's known now, he was game development manager for Cricket Australia back then, and he was able to navigate the internal mechanisms with cricket as to where these things should fit, because they had the same uncertainties within as, okay, it's IT, so where does this fall? Who's responsible? Whose budget? And Damien was able to sort of have the vision that, well, if we get this right in the community and we bring in things like the insurance component, registration, entry-level programs, that it ticks off the boxes for marketing, commercial, game development, high performance, umpiring databases. So around the table underneath James and the 7 GMs, 3 or 4 of them were actually for the first time on the same page. And they also then recognised that at national governing body level, by having a better cohesion and recognising that a lot of the data that was so essential to the foundation of the game comes from the grassroots. And we can talk about it all we want, yet if we don't know who's playing where or where these clubs are or what they're playing on, our decision making is not as powerful as it is today. So, thankfully Damien played that leadership role within cricket and was able to sort of bind the different areas together. And we also sort of tell the story that when James Sutherland, who's still the CEO, and that I think is a benefit to the sport that they've been consistent with their leadership from CEO level now for over 10 years. Well, back in 2007 when we did this, mobile phones were for speaking on, generally. There was no Facebook, no Snapchat, no WhatsApp, no YouTube, and James probably didn't have the foresight that 5 years down the track, he would go back to play cricket again for East Malvern Taronga C grade with his son and his son's mates and have a wonderful time experience with his family, and recognising that at that age, Will, who's now coming through the system now, Will at the age of 15 was already playing in 4 or 5 different teams, and he was accepting that his information was available online. This is before the app sort of space, but that was just an accepted sort of behaviour and expectation that, we've played a game, there's the score, that's how my mate's done, who are we playing next week, what's the ladder, and information's all available instantly. So thankfully, James is now going for that sort of life sort of first experience, and it forms a very important part as we now know as My Cricket. So that was when we pivoted out of before that was Results Vault Cricket, our own brand name. But we always took the position, Rohit, that we wanted to be more involved in making the back end easier, making the back end simpler, and having that functionality available instantly, not only to the person managing, but to their broader audience, and that the other elements that might be related to design or commerciality, let that sit with the client, let them be responsible for where that may go. And the last part, I suppose, of the puzzle that Dame was able to bring in was that Weet-Bix, who up until then were relying they'd invested very heavily in the Brett Lee TV commercials. How many Weet-Bix can Brett Lee? Which is a great success. If they wanted to do, what else can we do in this space? And for many years, Weet-Bix My Cricket became a partnership of value within the Cricket Australia business.
So I guess fast forwarding 14 years, and you're now sort of working with clients like Cricket Australia, Netball Australia, Australian Rugby Union, the ECB, and you've previously worked with Tennis Australia, FFA, essentially all of the major sporting associations, most of the major sporting associations in Australia. What was that like? Again, you sort of mentioned a little bit earlier of, I guess sporting associations have been viewed as being very traditional in the way that they operate and being very set in their minds of, as you mentioned, we have a website, it has contact details and those sort of things. What's it like selling into an organisation or selling into people that have that sort of traditional mindset and trying to bring in a new way of thinking or a new sort of product? Yeah,
it's a combination of one, ensuring that the person you're dealing with understands that you're here to help them, make them understand that there's nothing to be feared of in technology. It's to make their role, make their task easier, more powerful, give them greater control. You're not trying to replace what they're doing, you're not trying to diminish their value that they provide as a resource, whether it be a professional or a volunteer. It also makes sure that everybody is able to manage the degrees of accountability and awareness. And what still today in Australia, unfortunately, and this is where we've had a great experience recently in dealing with the England and Wales Cricket Board, or the ECB, and how smooth that has been in contrast, because unfortunately in Australia there's still a case where a national governing body is doing everything that's for the good of the game, yet their relationship with the states is difficult at times, can be challenging, can even be fractured because they see each other as being adversaries. And then you take a step or two down and the same sort of confusion or mistrust is there between associations, leagues and the governing bodies. So there are some sports like cricket now, I believe, they do that really, really well. They've got that understanding, and I think because they've been able to bring the community along with them on the journey, they've been able to get their board in, or they've been able to step away from boards being a group of people who are appointed by the states to represent the states. They've gone down the independent sort of path, and I think it's no accident that the AFL have enjoyed a fair degree of success at the high level because they've gone down the same sort of path. NRL are still arguing about it because it's just, they've just got to find their own way to accept that we all want to improve the game, and sometimes what the needs of the states are different to what the needs of the national body are. In recent years, I suppose we've seen the growth of competitions like Big Bash, and we're now seeing Super Netball, we're seeing AFL Women's, we're seeing Big Bash for both genders, male and women. And so the states are starting to slowly realise that, we've got to be a bit more open in our parochialism and thinking as to how the game can become better for all. And underpinning it, we all need to have a commercial position of some sort. Yet a state can't go to a broadcaster and demand dollars because they haven't got the audience for it. Yet if they're okay, and we're sort of seeing at the moment as an example of our Big Bash here, we have 2 more teams compared to our traditional state comp. So when the first T20 comp emerged in Australia, it was aligned to the state teams. So each state had 1 team. Big Bash has made that go to 8 teams, and thankfully there's no real fuss whether you barrack for the Stars or the Renegades. If you're in Melbourne or the Thunder or the Sixers, you barrack for somebody. Or you might follow a player, and because he plays for the Scorchers and you live in Blacktown, as long as you're following the game, as long as you're interested in the game. And we're seeing sort of similar things now emerge in the UK, where they've gone in cricket from they're an 18-team county, and who've all had a T20 sort of match. And now, thankfully, some of the counties are saying, well, if we remove the name the Surrey Stars, yet that team, the Stars, consists of Kent, Surrey, and one other, then we can all barrack for the same. We can all get behind it and just remove that sort of level of parochialism. And sometimes that parochialism, it influences the quality of decision making for the good of the sport. Slowly, it sort of shifted. I think the big thing recently, the embracing of high level women's competition, AFL, cricket, the rugby sevens. A fantastic sort of response where, apart from Rio, the visibility beyond that is just helping to transform certain parts of that game. It's now making other sports realise that, there's something here which we need to be a bit smarter about, and so therefore it's sort of shifting the crusty old secretary who's worn his blazer and he's stopwatch and clipboard for 35, 40 years. He's still important. We have to have him included, yet he's not necessarily the best person to make a decision on how a sport should go forward. Technology is also driving part of that. We're starting to see some interesting conversation take place between Cricket Australia now, the Australian Cricket Association, and the players on what the broadcast pie is. Yet underpinning that, it's like, but what's the value of the social footprint presence? We're seeing some cricket apparently now is rated 3 times bigger than NRL when they measure its social footprint and the type of traffic and eyeballs that it's capturing just through various social platforms, whether it be the governing body or the entity teams, is enormous. And I think it's rated like 20 million in Australia alone. It's sort of, as a different thing we're learning there, that Glenn Maxwell, one example, who now has been elevated, rightfully so, to the captain of Kings 11 Punjab in the IPL. It's just that Glenn Maxwell's global social footprint is probably bigger than some sports in Australia, and we need to recognise that technology has made that possible. Technology where the end person of interest has made a choice, and that's the choice that they've made to engage. So that's now starting to sort of filter through into the commercial value of sport, and hopefully we can sort of start to see just a more sensible method in how sports are governed by governing bodies, not through because you're a good bloke and you've been at the state for 20 odd years and therefore you get our vote. It's not always the way to be.
Yeah. I guess one of the things that's really sort of stuck out to me through this entire conversation is obviously the passion that you have for sports and for cricket, and obviously, even the way that, the story of InteractSport's kind of started. But not just the passion, but the level of information that you had, even at those sort of early days of, knowing the processes that people were going through. How important do you think that is in a business context, especially when you're starting something new, of really sort of understanding or knowing your market?
Absolutely critical. And the only way to achieve that, to be comfortable in what you feel is right or where you need to go, is you have to speak with people, you have to listen to people, you have to ask more questions. Probably one of the things that I was guilty of in the early stages for a long time, Rohit, was there was far too much information from me going out to the audience and telling them all the things that were right, but probably telling too much and maybe causing confusion because there was... So trying to boil it down to a couple of key, it's the why, how, what. This is why you do it. This is how we're going to do it. This is what the outcome's going to be, and try and keep it as simple as that, which is a process that a lot of has been a bit of a mantra to a lot of people in business, no matter whether it be anything really. And definitely since we became involved with Cricket Australia and the other national bodies, is spending more time listening to them and ensuring that that voices are heard, whether they be right or wrong. But let us listen to the changing needs, because it's very difficult to expect that a governing body is capable of making a completely accurate decision for a club. We're seeing now population sprawl in capital cities, and we're seeing new clubs. Caroline Springs, emerged as a sporting club around a housing development. So let's say 15 years ago now. That sporting community, I think it's now rated between 3,500 to 4,000 people across 8 or 9 different sports. Well, that's just emerged of its own behaviours, and what we can do better at is making sure that those people's voices are recognised and that they're not being subjected to head office being in Jollymont or St Leonard's and telling them what things should be. Technology is allowing us to do that. Being able to interact across social platforms makes those sort of things much easier to occur. But I suppose that we just got to be more conscious of that listening side of thing, Rohit, and not believing that everything that we think of first is the right way of doing it, and recognising that technology changes so quickly. I recently gave a presentation to a group of CEDA teachers, about 40 or so people, CEDA teachers, who are providing a very important education platform for those who choose a different path. And I stopped my presentation halfway through and said, look, I'm going to put up a slide now of this is what we believe is the shift in technology behaviour for receiving information. And this is how it's changed quickly. And if I was sitting here 2 years ago, I would be talking to you about what we're learning through Facebook, through YouTube, through Twitter. 2 years later, YouTube becomes a difficult thing to gauge because Facebook skew their algorithm whether a video has been placed natively against externally. Yep. So that shifts the view. You're teaching students who, in your classroom, they're relying more on Snapchat to find information out about NFL or wrestling or their point of interest. Your audience is not relying on Friday night, on being in front of the TV on Friday night football, waiting for that to come on 8 o'clock. They're getting their information on, if they're on public transport, it's quite possible that from their journey on a Monday morning into work, they have watched EPL, Major League Baseball, NBA, Rugby League, etc. And so their appetite is quite broad. How they're getting that information, whether it be through, well, it could be through Instagram, which was seen to be quite unique. Instagram's now owned by Facebook, so it's a different different sort of background. Snapchat's still independent, yet some of the Snapchat features you can actually now get on Instagram. So where does that sort of go to? And recognising that the appetite is just expanding enormously, yet that's coming from the user, not from what the sport thinks is going to happen from the top down. In a lot of cases, it's also coming from how the athletes themselves, at whatever profile, how they're embracing the technology that they're comfortable with as well. The end point is, I suppose the difference is that we're finding, which is making our job to degree a little bit easier today, is that everybody has a computer in their pocket, sometimes two, sometimes even more. We're starting to see some research come out now about the different behaviour groups that you might be at the MCG on a Friday night watching Richmond versus Collingwood, and you're watching the game live. You're immersed live in the experience, yet you'll be observing screens. You'll be watching the main scoreboard, so information coming through a screen. You'll be checking an app on your phone, which could be the club app or the official app, and you might be interacting socially with mates elsewhere about the same game. So we're taking in, even though we're having a live experience still, we're taking things in a variety of other ways as well. And technology is helping to drive that through. So it's starting to break some of those barriers, I suppose, in the past, why things would be seen to be difficult. The next step ahead of us is looking at how do we improve that experience so that the person can see what they want to see. Snapchat's been a pretty good sort of conveyor of information for that, being able to bring the fans' view together so that you can see, you're not relying on the broadcaster as such as being the only source of how a game is viewed.
Sure. And I guess kind of, again, sort of going back to your passion for cricket, and that's obviously where the initial sort of product was focused around. And as kind of mentioned earlier, you're working with a range of different sports and different associations at the moment. When, what was that sort of process like of going, okay, we feel like we need to now sort of expand out into different sports or even expand globally? What was that sort of process like internally? Okay,
so the need for us was pure commercially, because most things revolve around cricket, and cricket being a summer sport, which meant that our income and activity was over a period of the year. So we had to bring winter sport into it to get that sort of smoothing across the span. So football for us, soccer became a priority, and we found that it was a relatively easier sport. I won't say simple, but it was a relatively easier sport to bring onto our platform because all the hard coding had been done through cricket. And that at the time, that was dealing with the states directly, sort of similar sort of process as I described earlier on, and came down to relationships, and we got great support from Football Queensland, Football Fed Victoria back then, Football West, because they understood the operational need that they had to have in their community, and they weren't getting the same sort of guidance from the governing body. Not being critical of the governing body, they're just the different sort of needs. And as time's gone by, some sports have gone through a tender process. They've gone out to, one of the ubiquitous titles is the whole of sport sort of solution, and we went through an experience there probably in the late sort of 2000s where a number of sports sort of felt that, we need technology. We're now happy to invest. Good, thumbs up. We need to deal with a provider. And because technology moves so fast, to expect to deal with a provider to do everything is a really, really difficult thing to do. Particularly where we'd sort of adopted the philosophy that using an open framework through our APIs, that if we had to feed data into, so some of our clients, for example, the ARU use Salesforce for their CRM, they use IPSI for a payment platform. The core data from the participant comes into our platform and is presented and managed as it needs be. And then if it needs to go into those others for other requirements, because the person is a Waratahs fan or a Reds fan and the Super 15 franchises are all on Salesforce, then you're not asking the end user to duplicate information for databases. With cricket, they put in place a very successful insurance program through JLT. Well, the JLT database comes from My Cricket, single point of entry. So we've been able to sort of gradually help sports understand that, you might want all this stuff, and we can do this, and this really, really well. This we can help you provide, but you should be talking to the other people to do that sort of stuff. And they go, well, it's just the way. You can't do everything for all sort of people. As we sort of moving into this decade now, most of our major clients, we do have contracts, yet we're not subject to tender process. We're more subjected to partnership evolution and where can this go, where can this progress. Where there are other sports in Australia, unfortunately, and I think there's about six national governing bodies this year going through a tender process of some sort. Of the six, 4 of them have probably dealt with 3 or 4 different providers in the last 10, 12 years, and I would hate to think of the amount of money they've wasted in developing or paying for a technology which is now redundant. Part of that, and this is I suppose where I've got a little bit of a concern in some cases, Rohit, is that we need to get better within sport of recognising good management and stability. And there are some sports that are just horrendously guilty of knee-jerk reaction, sacking a CEO or turning over a board, and more so on emotion than actual reality. And quite often, some of the barriers that we've had in business have been, that tender you were going for, that's now stopped because there's a new CEO and he wants to do things differently. And we sort of go, well, yeah, okay, but that's fine. We accept that. The people actually in your clubs are the same people, and they've been there for 15, 16. They're the same people who are having to do the task or want to improve. And they're not accepting your national platform. They're using Facebook because Facebook's actually better than what you've invested in, and they feel safe in the Facebook space. They can manage their groups. They've got the CRM tools. So good luck in trying to get them off Facebook into your database. It's just not going to happen. You've missed that boat. And because, no disrespect, governing body, but because this is now your 3rd or 4th go at technology in 10 years, the trust in your community is not there. The value that the community sees is not there. All they can see is that, you're going through a new system again. How much money have we wasted on this, or how much money have we wasted or subsidised to go through this process that has not really delivered a lot of value? So hopefully, in some cases it's getting better, and just I'd like to think that those sort of decisions aren't flawed on personality rather than need.
Sure. And so finally, obviously, looking at the business that went from sort of discussing the idea over a few beers at the cricket to now, having over 4 million participants on the platform, with over 20,000 organisations.
So 20,000. So 20,000. So an organisation being a club or an association. So 20,000. So not team. If I was counting teams, it'd be much more than that. That's clubs. That's active clubs. So that's important also just to emphasise. There are a number of providers of various things in the sports space that make up these great lists. In fact, we once saw a competitor put on their stats about how big their coverage was, and we worked out they actually had more people than what were on the planet on their database, allegedly. So these aren't just anybody can create a list of these are all the people in the world. Yeah. This is actual. So more than 4 million participants registered, recognised, active, who've played a game somewhere and have data recorded against them. From over 20,000 organisations, that's clubs and or leagues. And the key point around that is understanding where they're actually playing a game. So our system now has more than 5 million fixtures or matches where we know who the teams were, where they played, who the team lists were, and what happened in that game. So it's a very, very rich sort of database of information that primarily started on a desktop, website type process. And by going back to that initial philosophy, data entered once, flows where it needs to go. Well, now we have apps, we have tablets, we have dedicated portals, we have media feeds, we have a whole range of things where the social platforms as well, where the end user decides how they want to receive the information, and our principle holds true sort of all the way through. So we're seeing a significant greater acceptance, and the apps has been a really important part of that. We've tried to adopt the same sort of philosophy around the apps, in that it can't crash. We had some experiences early on in some of our scoring sort of products where, due to the complexity, the reliability could have been improved. And if you're expecting people to use your products in the field, whether they be online or offline, because it's important. Our coverage in Australia isn't that great sometimes when it comes to network. The app can't crash, so we've kept that as our base fundamental, and having the interface being very simple and intuitive. So icons are easy to recognise. If it's a management function, you can't do things it's not supposed to do. And also recognising that, well, how does the end user want to see that information? Do they want to share it on Twitter? Do they want to share it on Facebook? Are they happy to get a dedicated sort of public app view? Does it need to fit into a customised app for a team as such? And what we're sort of observing, just as an example, so March for us is not a busy month by traffic wise. Most of our app traffic comes through the winter months, through the winter sports. Yet just looking at March just gone, our traffic year on year by user sessions, unique visitors and page views is 4.5 times greater than this time last year. We've only added a few more apps that haven't added an exhaustive amount of apps, and that's primarily coming from sports like netball, coming from school sports, coming from Australian rules football in country, not elite, this is country level sort of stuff. So the appetite there is absolutely growing at a ridiculous sort of scale. So it'll be fascinating to see what we're able to observe from the behaviour with the ECB when their cricket season starts in end of April, compared to what we usually do here in Australia. So,
Sure. So, my final question is, over the last 14 years, your role has probably changed significantly from those kind of early days to now manage a team and servicing sort of all of these different products and the different users that you have on your platform. So how has your role evolved over that time, and what are some of the less talked about challenges of kind of going through the scale and growth of a company that you've sort of faced and overcome?
Yeah, it was a challenge for quite some time, Rohit, because our first 6 or 7 years of existence, it was the three of us, and we were very task orientated, we were very responsive to meet the needs of our audience. So, rightly or wrongly, those behaviours as you start to build your team, so you go from 3 people, then to 6 people, then to 7 people, and now at 18 people. So we've had to become better at stepping back from certain things, delegating responsibility and nurturing those with responsibility. So not stepping in and sort of trying to take control of the situation. I feel that we've definitely improved by way of our listening, and definitely put more of an emphasis on our planning. We don't do any. We plan not to the point of exhaust. Our business plan's one page. We call it plan on a page. So we've identified our 4 key areas to the business, and those responsibilities, the strategies, and the measurements are a one-page document, and we review that monthly. We discuss it weekly in principle, and that plan on a page has got a life cycle of 1 year, and hopefully, as we achieve some of the key elements on that allows us then to shift that plan sort of forward. Ensuring that the roles of our staff are clear, and really wanting to, and we have done this, is increase the direct involvement of our staff with our clients. So if they're dealing with a staff member as a business analyst or a product manager or a support resource, they're not a person behind a screen. They're actually involved in meetings. And right now we do spend, so the room that we're in here now, Rohit, we would have each of our major clients come in here every week. And they might bring one person, they might bring 6 people. But we have that regular personal interaction, and we find that apart from improving the relationship, it also helps the personal development of our staff as well, which is, you have to get through personal interaction and be able to have those discussions and debates about the whys, the hows, and the whats, not coming just from the people who own the business or are responsible for the actual putting the food on the table, so to speak, but making sure that everyone's a part of it. So really, really proud with where some of our staff have gone, and especially now that we've moved firmly into the international space, being able to send our staff as part of their development, go travel, go meet new people, expand the relationships that you have, find opportunities, bring to the table what they may be. So we, all the sort of modern buzzwords about being nimble and agile and all that sorts of things we work towards. We actually probably put more emphasis on the doing side of things than just the plotting on a piece of paper and putting up the sticky notes and pretty. I think we're in a better space there. And just I suppose one example is we have very low staff turnover. There's in the IT space, there's a lot of attraction to work for the latest app group, or we're now seeing Slack and Zendesk here in Melbourne, which is great. I mean, the more people that come to Melbourne to broaden our tech abilities, I think it's fantastic. We're not exactly a high-end sort of glamorous sort of product compared to some of that sort of stuff, yet our developers are a solid team. We have resources from different. Miller comes from Sri Lanka. Priya, very proud of this. Our first female developer comes from Chennai. Would love to have more female web developers around. They're very hard to get in our sort of industry. Justin, our mobile developer, who's a passionate soccer fan, who his idea of a holiday is to go watch the Boston Red Sox. Yet they bring a very, very rich sort of background to make not only our products better, but also our company together as people sort of better as well. And we're sort of seeing that our clients tend to appreciate that also. So we're not just seen as being, oh, you're the guys who just do the technology, thanks, and that's it. Our relationship's becoming much stronger.
Yeah, it's all about sort of valuing the people that you sort of work with and being, obviously very conscious of their development and giving them sort of opportunity to grow as well.
The most it's really pleasing when you're able to step away as the owner or CEO of a business and your staff openly come to you and they're proud of the fact that I've just bought my first house, or I'm going to learn to drive. They don't need to drive to come to work, they can get public transport, but they're happy to try new things and do different things that they mightn't have sort of thought of before, or they can see for themselves that there's a career here in what they do, and which is pleasing because one of the difficulties in tech is you're exposed to transient workforce at times, and because our core market is community sport and a lot of people we deal with, they are rusted on, they don't change clubs year on year or change their sort of background, so we have to be reliable and stable as well, and hopefully we can sort of keep doing that for another, well, it's been 17 years so far. We can keep going a bit longer. We've even just separately, we've had a couple of the nephews have come in and done work experience and testing and sort of data recording on different things. So we're sort of adding value to our family in some ways there as well.
Fantastic. Andrew, so for anyone who's listening at home who wants to find out more about InteractSport, follow your journey, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, look, I'm a very visible person. Rohit, I'm on all sorts of social platforms. So email is awalton@interactsport.com. On Twitter, you can find me at Andrew Walton X or at InteractSport. We're there. Instagram, Facebook, there's plenty of ways to contact, and LinkedIn as well. So, and always happy to have an interaction with anybody because, it's pleasing to hear the feedback that we get, and pleasing to hear if there's issues that need to be handled. And probably even though we do have good support systems in place, and we use program managers like Jira to assist the relationship between ourselves and our clients, observing how feedback recently, because of our overseas exposure, we've been communicating directly with clients through Twitter and through Facebook on as it's their preferred way of doing stuff, rather than sending a support email to support, and you'd like them to do that. But I think we're sort of open to adapting and changing things there, and please feel free to find us any way that you need to.
Fantastic. I'll make sure those links are in the show notes. Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time and sharing your experience and insights today.
Thank you, Rob.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to episode 45 of the Startup Playbook podcast. You can find the show notes of my interview with Andrew, along with a curated list of tools and resources for startup founders at startupplaybook.co. As always, you can join the conversation through our Twitter account. The handle is @PlaybookStartup. Next week, I'll be interviewing Simon Julian. Simon is currently the GM and Head of Monetization at SitePoint, one of the world's largest online communities for web developers. Prior to SitePoint, Simon was the Head of B2B Partnerships at Lonely Planet and spent several years in the agency space as Managing Partner of Ariba and GM of Reactive. In the interview, we talk about building effective partnerships, content distribution strategies, and creating an engaged community. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at episode 46 next week.